We have got a fantastic guest on our show today, Rebecca Rego Barry, the author of The Vanishing of Carolyn Wells.
Well, she didn't exactly vanish
Where'd she go?
from reality, but she vanished from the public eye. She was a very prolific writer from the early part of the 20th century, wrote over 180 volumes, and yet no one knows about her today. And Rebecca has researched her life and her books, and is going to tell us all about that in our
Rebecca is
segment
so
today.
talented. She has a degree in book history, a master's degree in book history. I didn't even know there was such a thing. She worked as a librarian, and now this is her second book.
Right. And she also was editor of what's the whole title of Fine Books and what?
Fine Books and Collections.
Fine Books and Collections.
Fine Books and Collections.
Okay.
Who was that vanishing voice?
Anyway, we're looking forward to having her on the show today.
All right, everybody, join us for another edition of the Rare Book Cafe, the Book Lovers Rendezvous. See you real soon. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Rare Book Cafe, the Book Lovers Rendezvous. And for you francophones out there, you all know that rendezvous means let's get together. And today we're getting together with my co-host, Linn from Ridge Books, Calhoun, Georgia. Hello, Lee.
Hello, Ed, and hello, Rebecca. We're so pleased to have you with us this morning.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Our other rendezvous guest, Rebecca Rego Barry. Welcome. You have quite a CV, Rebecca. You've got a master's degree in book history. Isn't that cool? And you are a multi-published author.
Well, now I am. Yeah. Second book. That's multi.
Well, before we jump into the second book, which has recently come out, I want to hear a little bit about your first book, which was Where Do We Find Books? And the excitement and the curiosity of how books show up in the secondary market.
Yeah. I mean, that the whole idea of serendipity that book collectors love to talk about, and the whole idea of hunting for books. And I think, most book collectors have a story about finding something, unlikely, finding it at a garage sale or a library sale or something like that, something they were looking for or something that just really surprised them. So the first book, Rare Books Uncovered, was just kind of a collection of some of these great tales from book hunting.
Yeah. You have your own anecdote about a book that you found under a stack in a dusty old garage? Tell us about it.
Yeah, I have a story, and it's really before I became involved at all in the rare and antiquarian book world. I was working in publishing at the time. I was just out of college, and I was interested in American playwriting, and I saw a copy of Death of a Salesman. It was at a library book sale in Lenox, Massachusetts. So the book was $1 hardcover. And I picked it up. I just kind of liked the way it felt and looked, and I thought, this is a great book. I'll bring it home. And it took a couple of years, probably, once I was really in the sort of rare book world, where I figured out like it's a first edition. And not only that, it had a great little press pass tucked into it, a little cardboard card press pass of a reporter named William Shirer, who's pretty famous, World War II correspondent. And so I believe it was his book, actually. And that was my great find.
Well, it was a fascinating book, and it was the things that all of us in this trade hope to find, at some point. And ours was a second printing of Star Spangled Banner that turned up in a bound volume of old sheet music, not a published volume, but individual pages that someone had assembled that showed up for $14 at an antique mall one time. So it was a good find too.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Ed has had a find or two like that, particularly in his presidential and political memorabilia. I think we've lost Ed.
Oh.
Well, if we've lost Ed, then we can talk about your new book until he reappears, I suppose. I loved it. I just loved it. I love mysteries, and it was a mystery in a mystery, sort of. When you started your research, had you read any of her books? I mean, I know you had found out who she was from the book plate, but had you read any of her books? And if so, what was your opinion of her writing? I know you focused more on her importance in the publishing field, but prior to all of this, what had you read some of her books?
Let's see, before I knew anything really about her, kind of, again, the book plate was something I knew about, that she was a book collector. And then I heard in about 2018, 2019, that this British publisher was putting out a reprint of a book called Murder in the Bookshop by Carolyn Wells. And it was really that moment where I was like, oh, the book collector, the woman whose book I own, she also wrote mysteries, and this is her. And it really kind of all came together in that moment. And I decided to write an article about her for a magazine called Crime Reads. And so I read Murder in the Bookshop at that point. I don't think I read anything else by her by then. But then I started, researching her a little bit. I talked to Margaret Stetz at the University of Delaware, and she's the one that said to me, well, did you know that she also wrote all this poetry and humor and all the other stuff? And then I was like, oh, no, I didn't know that. And, started looking into that aspect of her life. And then actually, because this was really the beginning of the project and also the beginning of the pandemic, I started thinking to myself, well, what if I were to read every single one of her books, chronologically, I knew that there were probably more than 100, then I was more than 150. And then by the end, I had a list of about 182. And I thought, I don't think I can read all of them chronologically. This project will take me a decade.
Right. Well, I read The Clue to start with, and then I read Murder in the Bookshop. And in spite of the fact that they were 25, 26, 27 years apart, there were a lot of similarities in the two. The settings were similar. The murder centered around a beautiful young woman and men who were trying to win her over. And so I wonder, because I haven't read anything between those two yet, though I did download umpteen dozen of them. Is this a theme that follows a lot in the books? Is this kind of, her, the way she writes the books?
Yeah, in terms of her mystery, she wrote a total of 82 mysteries. And yes, I've only read, I want to say about 15 of them, which I felt like was enough to sort of get the gist of
Yeah.
there is definitely a formula. And she was known for doing this sort of either country house or Fifth Avenue type of setting, definitely the upper class, upper middle. Right. That was her formula. She thought people, whether they were rich or poor, enjoyed reading about
that. Yeah.
City.
Yeah.
So that is definitely, that was her. And also quite frankly, her own circles. That's where she moved as well. So she kind of had a good idea of what those parties were like and what those houses were like.
Right.
How do you get to be friends with Teddy Roosevelt and presidents and Thomas Edison? How does that happen?
Yeah, I mean, that is certainly a big question because, and that's, part of this whole research project has been, there's not, she doesn't really have an archive like many authors do, a central archive, and there's no literary estate. And so what I had to do when I was researching her was just kind of go to all these different university libraries or institutional libraries and reach out to private collectors and to booksellers and just say like, well, do you have any of her letters? Do you have any of her manuscripts? Do you have anything I could use, to help me complete this picture of her? So, so I do know that she was friendly with 4 presidents, especially Teddy Roosevelt, and I know she visited him at the White House and dedicated a book to his wife, and that he sent her this really cool telegram to thank her for that. So I know those things, but I don't know how they met. I don't know how that relationship came about.
Yeah. Well, she seemed to not take her actual writing very seriously, but she took herself seriously. She took what her writing provided for her seriously. And it does seem like she would have done something other than leave all of that stuff to her companion, that she would have taken care of having a literary archive, or of having an executor who would have taken care of her materials or something? Or did she just think, well, it's not, I've done what I want to do with it and who cares at this point? But, I read Gillette Burgess to my children. We love the Goops. We just love the Goops.
Oh,
And and my mother-in-law had loved them too. And so, that had come through the family. And so we remember him, but I'd never heard of her until your book. I'd never heard of her at all. And I think it's a shame that it would have been fairly easy for her memory to have been preserved a little bit better than it has been.
yeah.
Eh,
Now,
and
you did get a chance to meet her 87-year-old grandniece. Did
Yeah.
she have any first person material?
She has, and when I reached out to her, I found her basically through sleuthing around online through like Ancestry and Find a Grave and obituaries, and I finally found this person, and I wrote her a letter, and I was like, I don't know if you're the person I think you are, but if you are, if you're the great niece of Carolyn Wells, I'd love to talk to you. And within a day or 2 days, I got an email back. Yes, I am, and I'd love to be a part of this. And, pretty much said to me, the only thing that we really have of hers of any importance or is what Carolyn called her mermaid album, At the Sign of the Mermaid. It's this red Morocco bound volume in which she kept all of the sort of not necessarily autographs, but inscriptions, poetry, pieces of art from all of her famous friends who are artists and authors. So like Mark Twain, Roosevelt is actually in there, James Montgomery Flagg, the guy who did the poster I Want You. And then Rudyard Kipling and Mary Mapes Dodge, and they all did a little poem or a little inscription or a piece of art, and something that she, for 30 years, collected. And then actually, Belle de Costa Green, who was J.P. Morgan's librarian, actually had the thing bound for her
well,
into the form it is now.
I had read with interest about her relationship with Green. I take it she did not know of Green's ethnicity when she was. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
doubt. I think that Green pretty well hid that from everyone.
I think so too. I know you had mentioned that in some of the later printings that there had been some racial slurs removed from her books, and we had a guest on who talked about the relationship between Zora Neale Hurston and Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings and how that affected Rawlings, but there was no opportunity for Green to affect Wells in the same way. Yeah.
Right.
I have another question. Are there other women from this era in other genres that are forgotten, like science fiction or westerns? Writers in those fields sometimes are very prolific, like Wells was. And I just wondered if there are women hiding out there in some other fields that we don't know about.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be, right? I mean,
there's got to be, yeah.
Is there a Jane Grey out there? Probably.
Right.
She never wrote under a pseudonym?
Well, there is one book, one mystery said to be written under a pseudonym by Carolyn Wells. And I say that, but then I also have seen a letter of hers saying I have never, unequivocally never written under a pseudonym. So, you know, you have to
Yeah.
wonder either one of those things. She wasn't she didn't necessarily talk a lot about her personal life. She kind of hedged a bit on her age and other details. So sometimes it's hard to believe what she's saying, in her letters.
Well, and so many women in that era were writing under pseudonyms or were sounding like they were men. But even like, and a little bit earlier than her, but people like in our area, there was, I'm in the South, a writer named Charles Egbert Craddock, whose real name was Mary Murphy. And she wrote about things about the Smoky Mountains and North Carolina and Tennessee in that era. And then another regional writer, Jean Stratton Porter, whose name was Geneva, and her last name was Stratton, and then she married a Porter. And so it was her real name, but it was, configured so that it sounded like she was a man. and I think that was, fairly common. And yet Carolyn didn't bother with anything like that.
Yeah. It is surprising that she didn't try that.
Was she, did you happen to find, was she active in the suffragette movement? Did you read anything about that?
I did find it's one of those things that is probably questionable, but and Professor Margaret Stutz and I have kind of gone back and forth about this. So I did find about 10 or 12 poems that are pretty anti-suffrage that Carolyn wrote and published for various magazines. And even something in Ladies' Home Journal, they did sort of a page in Ladies' Home Journal in I think 1911 where they asked famous women of the time, what do you think about suffrage? And she frankly said, I think it's unintelligent and not worth doing. And yeah, on the flip side of that, she also did write a piece in her book, one of her books, about kind of poking fun at anti-suffragists. So, we do wonder, Margaret and I have been talking about some, and we wonder if she was maybe playing both sides, whoever would pay her or give her a byline, right. Wondering, how she really felt about it. That I don't know. I do know that she ended up marrying a man who was pro-suffrage and pretty outspoken about it. So, who knows? Who knows?
Who knows? I know you talk about that some in the book.
I do. Yeah. And one of those areas where it's like, when you fall in love with the person you're writing about a little bit, but you have to acknowledge that there are things that you might not like about them, per se.
Yeah. Or she may have felt that if she came out strongly, one way or the other, it would affect her popularity as a writer. Yeah. Or would affect her entree into all of these famous groups that she seemed to, fall into.
Right.
And so, she may have been very clever in terms of that. I don't know. But it was, and another thing that I considered, that talked about, she was what we would call a popular writer. Mm. Are popular writers today going to suffer the same fate? People that churn out, thinking of popular writers like James Patterson and John Grisham and Nora Roberts and Danielle Steele, for heaven's sakes, who just churn it out book after book after book. Are they going to suffer this fate as well? Because they don't have much literary, value. I personally don't think. What's going to happen to their output of hundreds of books?
Right.
But they probably have savvy agents.
Exactly. Turn them into movies or something like that. Well, Stephen King actually wrote it, or I think I don't know if he was writing or he was just quoted in long quotes in the Washington Post just about 6 months ago. And he takes up this same idea, will popular writers be remembered? And he's even questioning whether his name will be remembered in
Yeah.
100 years, which, you know, is definitely an arguable point. But yeah, I mean, this whole idea
Yeah.
that if you're popular, maybe you're just a flash in the pan, and that's it for you. But some popular authors are still remembered. I mean, Agatha Christie's quite well remembered.
Right.
And, I do say in my book, and, kind of saying it a little bit tongue in cheek, but she's got a wonderful literary estate. I mean, that really makes sure that
Yeah.
books are kept in print. And if there's anything like, say, racial slurs, for example, that you might want removed so that, a newer audience can be happier with them, they're doing that. They turn her books into films and movies,
Right.
shows, and they make sure that she remains in the popular eye. And that's something that you really need to have as an author.
Right. Yeah. Well,
Let me just remind our
Okay.
listeners that today we're talking to Rebecca Rego Barry, the author of the book The Vanishing of Carolyn Wells, a author from the early part of the 20th century who published over 180 books along with poems, games, and puzzles. Rebecca, before she started writing, she was very active in publishing these puzzles and games. She must have just had this very logical mind that it was able to transport from the puzzles and the games into the complexities of mystery novels.
Yeah, for her, I mean, puzzles were really the heart of everything for her. She talks a little bit in her memoir about the fact that she didn't really have a bookish family, but she did have a family that loved puzzles. And so even as a kid, she was working on word games and puzzles all the time. Her very first book is called At the Sign of the Sphinx, and it says like parentheses charades, which back then meant word games, riddles. So that's the kind of thing that she was doing throughout her lifetime. And she even talks about the fact that mysteries are really just another avenue for that, because for her, the clues, are the pieces, and the puzzle was the centralized part of any mystery. And that's why, when she's first writing mystery novels early on, her first mystery comes out in 1909. That's the fashion, the sort of clue puzzlers, the how done it, follow the clues and figure it out. But then sometime around, after World War One, kind of fashion for mystery novels begins to change, and it kind of starts moving toward characters and motivation and sort of hard-boiled, police kinds of mysteries. And she doesn't keep up with that fashion. She keeps doing what she's been doing, which, tends to hurt her with the later critics. But she had a readership that adored her, and she just kept producing novels 3, 4, 5, sometimes a year, and she was very successful at it.
I have a guilty pleasure, which is reading Regency romances late at night. And there are so many similarities in those and the ones of Carolyn's that I have read. The country house setting, the manners, the what's proper and what's not proper. And many of them involve deaths or murders or whatever. And so it's an interesting comparison. I hate to admit that I really enjoy these, but it's fun. Like
Yeah, you would like.
I know, like my book club is reading Still Alice, which is certainly serious, very serious reading. And so you need a break from reading about early onset Alzheimer's. So, but there were so many similarities in the way that she approaches her settings, particularly in her characters, and some of these really silly romances. So that's my confession for today.
I
Well,
love the term that I had never heard before, closed door mysteries. I get that refers to a murder which happened in a room or in a house, so all the clues are self-contained.
A locked room.
locked
mystery.
room. Yes. Mystery happens in a locked, quote unquote, sealed room. Oh, the windows don't open and the door doesn't open. And, is there a secret panel somewhere in the room? Because that's the only way someone might get in. Yeah, that is what she was doing. The locked room mystery.
Yes. Or as in the clue, we have the fireplace grate.
Yeah.
Yeah. which seemed a little improbable, but you know.
What did you do, Rebecca, solving some of these crimes as you read her books?
You know,
Did she provide enough clues that made it possible?
I've never been much of a mystery reader, so that's not how I got to Carolyn. And even now, when I'm reading books that are, have some kind of mystery or suspense element, I try very hard to kind of turn off that part of my brain that might be wondering, like, oh, can I solve it before the end? I kind of like to have the novel just unfold at its own pace, and I try not to second guess and figure out who it is and what's going on. I don't know if that's a flaw in my own reading brain, but I don't do that. I'm not much at puzzles either, so maybe those two things go together.
You're playing the role of the reader, not the role of Hercule Poirot.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So your next book will not be a mystery.
No, I'm not even sure I could pull it off, frankly. I mean, she seems to have been able to just throw them together, like it was nothing. But I do think there's a lot of mechanics that go into it.
Yeah.
And she actually equated it to poetry, and even to math on some occasions. That it's really it's an equation. There are parts that have to be there, and if you throw something in that doesn't belong, it throws everything off. She believed that.
Rebecca, are you percolating another novel, another book, another nonfiction?
Not really, not yet. I mean, this, between my first book and my second book, there's 8 or 9 years. So it really took a while to come up with the idea that I really wanted to work on. And I think if you're going to, this one took 3 or 4 years to research, to write. And I think if you're going to spend that amount of time on something, it has to be something that you really feel compelled to work on. And I absolutely felt compelled to work on Carolyn Wells and just bring her name back to the surface a little bit and bring her back into that conversation. So I haven't quite found the next thing that I want to do that with.
Well, we'll look forward to it if you do.
Thank you.
And if we're still around, we'll be glad to have you on to talk about it.
I hope it won't be 8 or 9 years, but it might be.
Yeah.
Well, you're still involved in the rare book business. I understand that you are on the PR side for Raab Rare Books, an absolutely fabulous rare book seller who has some of the finest American history items on their website. And somehow or other, they always seem to grab a George Washington or a Thomas Jefferson in their inventory. It must be wonderful working with a company like that, especially with your book history background.
Yeah, I mean, the transition from journalism to what I'm doing at the Raab Collection it wasn't a huge leap. I'm still doing lots of writing and producing content and videos and social media and trying to get people interested in really cool historical documents. So to me, like, it's really kind of very similar to what I was doing before. And yeah, I mean, it is really fun. There's that discovery aspect that I still from my work at fine books and like just as a collector in general. Just the idea of like discovering a new document or discovering the story behind a document. Maybe the document's already known, but if you dig into it a little bit and you find out, well, this person was related to this person, or this guy ended up going 20 years from after this letter was written, this happens to him. And I mean, there's really such amazing stories in all this history. And so yeah, what I'm doing now with the Raab Collection is really just an extension of what I was doing when I was freelance writing and editing about rare books and history, in general.
You're very fortunate to be around such great primary source material.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun stuff.
All right, before we let you go, where can our listeners pick up a copy of your book, The Vanishing of Carolyn Wells?
Well, it's really available anywhere that you buy or borrow or download books. And, for book collector types like me, if you wanted a signed or inscribed copy, I do have a link on my website that, I would.
And what is your website?
It's just my name, RebeccaRegoBarry.com.
Great. You hear that, everybody? Signed copies of The Vanishing of Carolyn Wells at RebeccaRegoBarry.com.
I think I need one of those. I downloaded it because of time constraints,
Mhm.
to do it. But yeah, I think I need to order one of those. I do like mysteries. I really enjoy mysteries, and plan to read some more of hers,
Yeah.
just to kind of get more of a feel of some of the things that she did. I read part of one of the Patty books too.
Yeah.
I skipped over to Patty Bride, which I guess is the last one in it.
Mhm.
And and a lot of those people you could pretty much find in any of her other books, as well. It's kind of like a theater company, where you've got the ingenue and the leading man and the curmudgeon and the all of these same characters who appear over and over in different settings and different scripts.
Mhm.
As a lot of it strikes me that way, with her books. But it's been fun to read. It really has.
Yeah. The formula that you follow, and once it works, you just keep doing it.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. You might like Vicky Van. That was another one of her really popular
Okay. And it
mysteries.
was made into a movie.
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
A handful of her books were adapted into silent films. Unfortunately, none of which are available to see.
Right.
They all, they weren't preserved correctly, and they've just disappeared.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, especially because half of them were done with Thomas Edison. So, when I first learned about these silent films, I thought, okay, this is no problem. Library of Congress has got a great, collection of Edison films. But this particular chunk of time, 1908 to 1919, or, around that area, there just is very, very little that was preserved.
Well, we need to do a better job of preserving things, and hopefully, with modern technology, that has become a little bit easier.
Yeah.
So, maybe so. Well, do you have any more questions, Ed?
I think I'm about out, and I think we're about out of time.
I'm
I
out
can't
of
tell you.
time. Yeah.
I know all we've got is time.
But
The books have been endorsed by our co-host Linn. She's read it from cover to cover, and I'm more of a nonfiction type of person, so I'm looking forward to reading the biography as well. Thank you so much for your efforts. We're looking forward to your next book when it comes out, everybody. Rebecca Rego Barry, The Vanishing of Carolyn Wells.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. This is
All right, folks, that's it. We're wrapping it up. The Rare Book Cafe, the Book Lovers Rendezvous. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, or wherever good podcasts are given away for free. Thanks for joining us today, everybody.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi, Rebecca. Lee, I'm so sorry about that. I have no idea what happened. I just vanished from our show for a couple of minutes.
That's okay. It didn't slow us down. Rebecca and I just kept talking.
I
sure
know
it was just technical.
For someone who had a broken leg, you just keep on rolling.
That's right. It didn't affect my talking.
All right, everybody. Rebecca Rego Barry, The Vanishing of Carolyn Wells. I wasn't there for the whole thing, but I enjoyed the part where I was.